In the shadowy corridors of Buckingham Palace, where whispered secrets carry more weight than crown jewels, one man's dedication to duty would expose a betrayal that reached the very heart of the royal family. When palace security guard Marcus Thompson noticed unusual patterns in the late-night movements of certain staff members, he had no idea his observations would uncover a web of leaked information that had been feeding the media's insatiable appetite for royal scandal for months. What started as routine security checks would reveal that someone within Camilla's trusted inner circle had been systematically betraying Prince Harry's most private moments, personal struggles, and family conversations to tabloid journalists. The truth, when it finally emerged, would shake the foundations of royal protocol and expose how deeply personal vendettas can poison even the most sacred bonds of loyalty and trust. This is the true story of how one guard's vigilance uncovered the most shocking breach of royal confidentiality in modern history, and how the revelation would forever change the dynamics within the House of Windsor. Marcus Thompson had worked as a palace security guard for 12 years, and in that time, he had learned that the most important skill in his profession wasn't physical strength or quick reflexes, but the ability to notice things that others missed. At 43 years old, with graying temples and sharp blue eyes, Marcus had developed an almost supernatural awareness of the subtle rhythms that governed palace life. He knew which footsteps belonged to which royal family member, which staff members had legitimate reasons to be in certain areas at specific times, and, most importantly, when something was out of place. The autumn of 2023 had been particularly challenging for the royal family. Prince Harry's ongoing disputes with his family had reached new levels of intensity, and the media seemed to have an endless supply of intimate details about his private conversations, personal struggles, and behind-the-scenes moments. What troubled Marcus most was the accuracy of these reports. These weren't the usual tabloid speculation or paparazzi shots taken from a distance. These were detailed accounts of private conversations, exact quotes from family meetings, and personal information that could only have come from someone with direct access to the prince's most intimate moments. Marcus had noticed the patterns starting in late September. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, around 10:30, he would see Sarah Whitmore, one of Camilla's senior ladies-in-waiting, making unusual trips to the east wing of the palace. Sarah had worked for the Queen Consort for 8 years and was known for her discretion and loyalty. She was a woman in her mid-50s, always impeccably dressed, with silver hair pulled back in a neat chignon, and an air of quiet authority that commanded respect from both staff and royals alike. What made these trips unusual wasn't their timing, but their destination. Sarah would walk through the corridors with purpose, carrying a small leather portfolio, and disappear into the communications room for exactly 20 minutes. The communications room housed secure telephone lines and internet connections used for official palace business, but it was rarely used after 9 in the evening unless there was an emergency or urgent official matter requiring immediate attention. Marcus had initially dismissed these observations as coincidental. Senior staff members often had legitimate reasons for using secure communications, especially during times when the royal family was dealing with sensitive situations. However, his curiosity was piqued when he realized that Sarah's visits to the communications room consistently occurred within hours of major news stories breaking about Prince Harry. The first incident that caught Marcus's attention happened on a Thursday evening in early October. Sarah had made her usual trip to the communications room, and by Friday morning, a major tabloid had published a detailed story about Prince Harry's private conversation with his father regarding his future role in the monarchy. The article included direct quotes and specific details about the prince's emotional state during the conversation that could only have been known by someone who was either present during the discussion or had been briefed about it immediately afterward. Marcus began keeping informal notes of Sarah's movements, not out of suspicion initially, but simply because his security training had taught him to document anything that seemed unusual. He recorded the dates and times of her visits, the duration of her stays in the communications room, and any correlations with subsequent media reports. Over the course of 3 weeks, a clear pattern emerged that made Marcus increasingly uncomfortable. The breakthrough came on a cold October evening when Marcus was conducting his routine security sweep of the palace's upper floors. As he passed near the communications room, he heard Sarah's voice through the slightly ajar door. She was speaking in hushed tones, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus positioned himself where he could hear without being seen, his heart racing as he realized the significance of what he was about to witness. Sarah was on the phone with someone, and she was discussing Prince Harry's recent private meeting with his grandmother's former private secretary. She was providing detailed information about Harry's emotional breakdown during the conversation, his specific concerns about media coverage of his wife, and his fears about the impact of negative publicity on his children. The level of detail was extraordinary, and it became clear to Marcus that Sarah had either been present during this private meeting or had access to someone who had briefed her about it in great detail. What made the situation even more shocking was the clinical, businesslike manner in which Sarah was relaying this deeply personal information. She wasn't gossiping or sharing information casually with a friend. This was clearly a structured, professional arrangement. She was methodically going through specific points, confirming details with the person on the other end of the line, and even discussing payment arrangements for the information she was providing. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized the full implications of what he was witnessing. Sarah Whitmore, one of the Queen Consort's most trusted confidants, was systematically betraying Prince Harry's privacy for financial gain. She was selling his most intimate moments, his private struggles, and his personal conversations to tabloid journalists who were eager to exploit his pain for profit. The conversation lasted approximately 15 minutes, during which Sarah provided information about Harry's recent therapy sessions, his concerns about his children's security, and his ongoing struggles with depression and anxiety. She spoke about these deeply personal matters with the detached professionalism of someone reading a shopping list, showing no emotional connection to the human cost of her betrayal. When the call ended, Marcus quickly moved away from the door and continued his security rounds, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. He had stumbled upon what appeared to be a systematic breach of royal confidentiality at the highest levels, orchestrated by someone who had unprecedented access to the royal family's most private moments. Over the following days, Marcus struggled with how to handle this information. His loyalty was to the crown and to protecting the royal family from threats, but he also understood that reporting Sarah's activities would have far-reaching consequences. He would be accusing a senior member of the royal household staff of betraying the trust that had been placed in her, and he would need concrete evidence to support such a serious allegation. Marcus decided to continue his observations, but with greater care and more detailed documentation. He began noting not just Sarah's visits to the communications room, but also her interactions with other staff members, her access to different areas of the palace, and any unusual changes in her behavior or routine. He also started paying closer attention to the timing of media stories about Prince Harry and comparing them with Sarah's activities. The pattern that emerged over the following weeks was undeniable. Every major story about Prince Harry's private life that appeared in the tabloids could be traced back to one of Sarah's evening visits to the communications room. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental, and the level of detail in the published stories was too accurate to have come from speculation or external sources. What particularly troubled Marcus was the realization that Sarah's betrayal wasn't limited to recent events. As he reviewed his mental catalog of unusual incidents over the past several months, he began to see a pattern stretching back much further than he had initially realized. Stories that had seemed like lucky breaks for tabloid journalists or results of exceptional investigative work now took on a more sinister significance when viewed in the context of Sarah's systematic information sharing. The emotional toll of this discovery was significant for Marcus. He had always taken pride in his role as a protector of the royal family, and the realization that he had unknowingly allowed this betrayal to continue for months made him feel complicit in Prince Harry's suffering. He had witnessed the prince's obvious distress over the constant media intrusion into his private life, and Now he understood that much of that intrusion was the result of deliberate betrayal by someone who should have been protecting his interests. As November approached, Marcus knew he could no longer remain a passive observer. The weight of his knowledge was becoming unbearable, and his sense of duty to the crown demanded that he take action. However, he also understood that he needed to be extremely careful about how he proceeded. Making false accusations against a senior member of the royal household would end his career and potentially expose him to legal consequences. He needed irrefutable evidence that would stand up to the most rigorous scrutiny. The question that kept Marcus awake at night was not whether Sarah was betraying Prince Harry's trust, but rather how extensive the betrayal was and whether she was acting alone. If someone in Camilla's inner circle was willing to sell information about Prince Harry, what other breaches of confidentiality might be occurring? How many other members of the royal family might be vulnerable to similar betrayals? And, most importantly, how could such a fundamental breach of trust be allowed to continue at the very heart of the British monarchy? The first week of November brought an unexpected opportunity for Marcus to gather the concrete evidence he desperately needed. A scheduled renovation of the palace's main security office meant that temporary monitoring equipment had been installed throughout the building, including several areas that weren't normally under surveillance. Marcus realized that the communications room, where Sarah conducted her clandestine phone calls, was now equipped with audio recording capabilities that were being used to test the new security systems. Marcus faced a moral and professional dilemma that kept him awake for several nights. Accessing these recordings would require him to use his security clearance in ways that weren't strictly authorized, but he also knew that without concrete evidence, his accusations against Sarah would be dismissed as unfounded suspicion. The weight of his responsibility to protect the royal family ultimately overcame his concerns about protocol violations. On a quiet Tuesday evening, when most of the palace staff had gone home and the royal family was attending a private dinner, Marcus carefully accessed the temporary recording system. His hands trembled as he navigated through the digital files, searching for recordings from the dates and times when he had observed Sarah's suspicious activities. What he discovered was far more extensive and disturbing than he had imagined. The recordings revealed that Sarah's betrayal of Prince Harry's privacy had been going on for over 8 months, beginning shortly after the prince's controversial interviews about his family had aired. The conversations Marcus uncovered showed a level of systematic information gathering and dissemination that shocked him with its professional sophistication and emotional callousness. In one particularly disturbing recording from mid-October, Sarah could be heard providing a tabloid journalist with detailed information about Prince Harry's private conversation with his father about his mother's death. She described the prince's emotional breakdown, his specific words about feeling abandoned by his family, and even his physical reactions during the conversation. The journalist on the other end of the call was clearly taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details or requesting confirmation of direct quotes. What made this conversation especially heartbreaking was the clinical manner in which Sarah discussed Prince Harry's grief and trauma. She spoke about his tears, his angry outbursts, and his expressions of loneliness as if they were commodities to be packaged and sold to the highest bidder. There was no trace of empathy in her voice, no recognition of the human cost of her betrayal. She was simply a businesswoman conducting a transaction, trading in the currency of human pain and private suffering. Another recording revealed the sophisticated network Sarah had developed to gather information about Prince Harry's activities. She had cultivated relationships with housekeeping staff who cleaned the prince's private quarters, with kitchen staff who prepared his meals, and even with security guards who were responsible for his protection. She had created a web of informants who provided her with details about his daily routines, his visitors, his phone conversations, and his personal habits. The recording showed that Sarah had convinced these staff members that they were helping to protect Prince Harry by keeping her informed about his activities and emotional state. She had positioned herself as someone who cared deeply about the prince's well-being and needed information to ensure his safety and security. Many of the staff members who were providing her with information genuinely believed they were acting in Prince Harry's best interests, unaware that their reports were being sold to journalists who used the information to invade his privacy and exploit his vulnerabilities. Marcus discovered that Sarah had been particularly focused on gathering information about Prince Harry's therapy sessions and his struggles with mental health. She had somehow gained access to details about his treatment for depression and anxiety, his medication regimen, and even his private conversations with his therapist. This information was being passed along to journalists who used it to write speculative articles about the prince's psychological state and his fitness for public duties. The financial arrangements revealed in the recordings were equally shocking. Sarah was receiving substantial payments for her information, with different rates for different types of stories. Exclusive details about private family conversations commanded the highest prices, while routine information about the prince's daily activities was sold for smaller amounts. Marcus calculated that over the 8-month period, Sarah had likely earned tens of thousands of pounds from her systematic betrayal of Prince Harry's privacy. One of the most devastating recordings Marcus uncovered was from late October, just days before he had first overheard Sarah's phone conversations. In this recording, Sarah was discussing Prince Harry's private conversation with his children about their grandfather's upcoming coronation. She provided detailed quotes from the prince's explanation to his children about why they wouldn't be playing a prominent role in the ceremony, including the children's confused and hurt reactions to this news. The journalist on the other end of this particular call was clearly excited about the potential story, recognizing the public interest in details about Prince Harry's relationship with his children and their connection to the royal family. Sarah provided specific quotes from the children, descriptions of their emotional reactions, and even details about how Prince Harry had tried to comfort them when they became upset about their diminished role in family events. Marcus felt physically ill as he listened to this conversation. The idea that someone was profiting from the private pain of young children, exploiting their confusion and hurt for tabloid headlines, represented a level of betrayal that went beyond anything he had imagined possible. These were not just breaches of professional confidentiality, but fundamental violations of human decency and the most basic principles of child protection. As Marcus continued his investigation, he discovered that Sarah's activities were part of a larger pattern of information leaking that extended beyond Prince Harry. While the prince appeared to be her primary target, Sarah was also selling information about other members of the royal family, including details about Camilla's private conversations, King Charles's health concerns, and even gossip about staff members and their personal lives. The recordings revealed that Sarah had developed relationships with journalists from multiple publications, carefully managing her information flow to maximize her profits while avoiding detection. She had created a complex system of coded communications, used different phone numbers for different contacts, and had even established offshore bank accounts to receive payments for her most sensitive information. What particularly troubled Marcus was the realization that Sarah's position within Camilla's inner circle gave her access to information that went far beyond what any single staff member should have known. She was present at private family meetings, had access to confidential correspondence, and was trusted with sensitive information about the royal family's personal relationships and private struggles. Her betrayal represented not just a breach of individual privacy, but a fundamental violation of the trust that formed the foundation of the royal household's operations. Marcus also discovered evidence that Sarah had been actively working to cultivate additional sources of information within the palace. She had been targeting younger staff members who were struggling financially, offering them small payments for seemingly innocent information about their daily observations and experiences. Many of these staff members had no idea that their casual conversations with Sarah were being used to build detailed profiles of the royal family's private lives. The scope of Sarah's information-gathering operation was truly staggering. Marcus found evidence that she had been collecting information about the royal family's medical appointments, their personal correspondence, their private travel arrangements, and even their intimate conversations with friends and confidants. She had turned the palace into a surveillance operation, with herself at the center of a network designed to exploit every aspect of the royal family's private lives. One of the most professionally damaging aspects of Sarah's activities was her systematic undermining of the palace's security protocols. She had been sharing information about the royal family security arrangements, their travel schedules, and their private residences with journalists who used this information to plan more effective paparazzi operations and media ambushes. Her betrayal had made the entire royal family more vulnerable to harassment and potential security threats. As Marcus compiled his evidence, he began to understand the full scope of the damage Sarah had caused. Her activities had not only violated Prince Harry's privacy, but had also contributed to the breakdown of trust within the royal household. Staff members had become suspicious of each other, security protocols had been compromised, and the royal family's ability to maintain private spaces for personal relationships and emotional healing had been severely undermined. The evidence Marcus had gathered painted a picture of systematic betrayal that went to the heart of the royal family's most fundamental assumptions about loyalty and trust. Sarah Whitmore, a woman who had been entrusted with access to the most private aspects of royal life, had used that access to exploit the very people she was supposed to protect and serve. Her actions represented not just individual betrayal, but a fundamental corruption of the principles that were supposed to govern service to the crown. Marcus knew that presenting this evidence would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Sarah would face serious legal and professional consequences. The royal family would have to confront the reality of how thoroughly their privacy had been compromised, and the entire palace would need to undergo a comprehensive review of security protocols and staff vetting procedures. The revelations would also likely trigger a broader examination of media ethics and the boundaries of legitimate public interest in the royal family's private lives. As November progressed, and Marcus continued to document the full extent of Sarah's activities, he struggled with the weight of his knowledge and the responsibility of deciding when and how to act on the evidence he had gathered. He understood that his discoveries would change everything for the royal family and would likely end several careers, including possibly his own. However, he also knew that allowing this systematic betrayal to continue was unthinkable, and that his duty to protect the royal family demanded that he expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The decision to finally act came on a cold November morning when Marcus witnessed something that shattered his remaining doubts about the severity of Sarah's betrayal. He was conducting his routine morning security sweep when he observed Prince Harry in one of the palace's private sitting rooms, speaking on the phone with what appeared to be a mental health professional. The prince was clearly in distress, his voice breaking as he discussed his struggles with depression and his fears about the impact of constant media harassment on his family. What Marcus saw next filled him with a cold rage that surprised him with its intensity. Sarah Whitmore was positioned just outside the sitting room, carefully listening to Prince Harry's private conversation and taking notes in a small leather journal. She was literally eavesdropping on the prince's therapy session, documenting his most vulnerable moments for later sale to tabloid journalists. The calculated cruelty of this act, the complete absence of human empathy it represented, convinced Marcus that immediate action was not just necessary, but morally imperative. Marcus spent the remainder of that morning carefully planning his approach. He knew that confronting Sarah directly would likely result in her destroying evidence and potentially disappearing before formal charges could be brought. Instead, he decided to report his findings directly to Sir Michael Harrison, the Queen Consort's private secretary, who had ultimate responsibility for managing Camilla's household staff and would have the authority to take immediate action. The meeting with Sir Michael was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon in his private office. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including detailed logs of his observations, copies of the audio recordings he had accessed, and a timeline correlating Sarah's activities with subsequent media stories. He understood that his career might end as a result of this meeting, but he also knew that protecting the royal family from this systematic betrayal was more important than his personal job security. Sir Michael Harrison was a man in his early 60s who had served the royal family for over 30 years. He had a reputation for absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty, but also for taking swift and decisive action when faced with threats to the royal household. Marcus had worked with Sir Michael on several security matters over the years and respected his judgment and integrity. When Marcus presented his evidence, Sir Michael's reaction was one of shocked disbelief followed by carefully controlled anger. He reviewed the documentation with meticulous attention to detail, asking pointed questions about Marcus's methodology and the reliability of his sources. As the scope and duration of Sarah's betrayal became clear, Sir Michael's professional composure began to crack, revealing the deep personal sense of betrayal he felt at having been deceived by someone he had trusted implicitly. Sir Michael immediately recognized the legal and security implications of Marcus's discoveries. Sarah's activities represented not just breaches of confidentiality, but potentially serious criminal offenses, including theft of confidential information, conspiracy to violate privacy laws, and fraud. The involvement of offshore bank accounts and systematic payments from media organizations suggested a level of criminal sophistication that would require involvement from law enforcement agencies. The immediate priority was to prevent Sarah from destroying evidence or fleeing before she could be properly investigated. Sir Michael made several urgent phone calls, including one to the palace's head of security and another to the royal family's legal team. Within hours, a coordinated response plan had been developed that would allow them to confront Sarah while preserving the evidence needed for potential criminal prosecution. The confrontation with Sarah Whitmore took place the following morning in Sir Michael's office. She arrived expecting a routine meeting about upcoming royal engagements, completely unaware that her systematic betrayal had been discovered. Marcus was present as a witness, along with the head of palace security and a representative from the royal family's legal team. Sir Michael's approach was professional but uncompromising. He presented Sarah with key pieces of evidence, including audio recordings of her phone conversations with journalists and financial records showing payments from media organizations. He gave her an opportunity to explain her actions and to provide her side of the story before formal charges were considered. Sarah's initial reaction was denial and indignation. She claimed that Marcus's accusations were based on misunderstandings and coincidences, and she questioned his motives for conducting what she characterized as unauthorized surveillance of her activities. However, as Sir Michael presented more detailed evidence, including direct quotes from her recorded conversations and specific financial transactions, her defensive posture began to crumble. The moment when Sarah's facade finally collapsed was when Sir Michael played the recording of her conversation about Prince Harry's children and their reactions to being excluded from prominent roles in royal ceremonies. As she heard her own voice callously discussing the private pain of young children, something seemed to break inside her. The professional mask she had maintained throughout her years of service disappeared, revealing the calculating opportunist who had been hiding beneath the surface. Sarah's eventual confession was both comprehensive and deeply disturbing. She admitted to selling information about Prince Harry and other members of the royal family to multiple tabloid publications over a period of nearly 9 months. She revealed that her initial contact with journalists had come through a former palace staff member who had been dismissed for similar breaches of confidentiality and who had introduced her to a network of media contacts willing to pay substantial sums for inside information. What emerged from Sarah's confession was a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond what Marcus had initially discovered. Sarah had been working with a sophisticated operation that included journalists, photographers, and even private investigators who were coordinated in their efforts to gather compromising information about the royal family. She had been providing not just information, but also logistical support for media operations, including details about security arrangements and private travel plans. The financial motivations for Sarah's betrayal were both personal and extensive. She revealed that she had accumulated substantial gambling debts and had been facing potential bankruptcy when she was first approached by media contacts offering to pay for inside information. What had started as occasional small payments for minor details had gradually escalated into a comprehensive information selling operation that generated thousands of pounds per month. Sarah also admitted to actively recruiting other palace staff members to provide information, using a combination of financial incentives and emotional manipulation to convince them to violate their oaths of confidentiality. She had targeted staff members who were struggling financially or who felt undervalued by their royal employers, convincing them that sharing information was a form of justified revenge against an unfair system. One of the most disturbing aspects of Sarah's confession was her detailed description of how she had systematically violated Prince Harry's privacy during some of his most vulnerable moments. She admitted to eavesdropping on his private conversations with family members, listening in on his phone calls with mental health professionals, and even going through his personal correspondence when she had access to his private quarters. Sarah described how she had positioned herself to overhear private conversations between Prince Harry and his father about their relationship, his role in the royal family, and his struggles with the constant media attention. She had taken careful notes during these conversations, memorizing direct quotes and emotional details that she later sold to journalists who used the information to write stories that further damaged the prince's relationship with his family and his public reputation. The extent of Sarah's knowledge about Prince Harry's personal life was truly shocking. She had detailed information about his therapy sessions, his medication regimen, his private conversations with friends, and even intimate details about his relationship with his wife. She had systematically violated every boundary of privacy and human decency, treating the prince's most personal struggles as commercial opportunities. During her confession, Sarah showed no genuine remorse for the pain she had caused Prince Harry and his family. Her primary concerns were about the legal consequences she would face and the impact on her own reputation and financial situation. She seemed genuinely surprised that anyone would consider her actions to be seriously wrong, apparently believing that her financial difficulties justified her systematic betrayal of the trust that had been placed in her. Sir Michael's response to Sarah's confession was swift and comprehensive. She was immediately suspended from all duties and banned from palace grounds pending a full investigation. Her security clearances were revoked, her access to royal family members was terminated, and arrangements were made to ensure that she could not remove or destroy any additional evidence of her activities. The legal team began immediate preparations for potential criminal charges, including theft, fraud, violation of privacy laws, and conspiracy charges related to her coordination with media organizations. The financial records Sarah had maintained of her transactions with journalists provided clear evidence of the systematic nature of her crimes and the substantial profits she had generated from her betrayal. Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness as Sarah's confession confirmed the worst of his suspicions. Relief that his investigation had been successful and that the systematic betrayal of Prince Harry's privacy had finally been exposed, but sadness at the realization of how thoroughly the prince's trust had been violated by someone who was supposed to be protecting his interests. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's confession was chaotic and emotionally charged. Sir Michael faced the difficult task of informing the Queen Consort that one of her most trusted staff members had been systematically betraying the royal family for months. The revelation required a complete review of security protocols, staff vetting procedures, and information management systems throughout the royal household. Marcus understood that Sarah's exposure was just the beginning of a much larger process of investigation and reform that would be necessary to prevent similar betrayals in the future. The royal family would need to confront the reality that their most fundamental assumptions about loyalty and trust had been violated in ways they had never imagined possible, and that protecting their privacy would require much more sophisticated and comprehensive security measures than had previously been considered necessary. As the immediate crisis response unfolded around him, Marcus reflected on the personal cost of his decision to investigate Sarah's activities. He had uncovered a systematic betrayal that had caused immense pain to Prince Harry and his family, but he had also been forced to confront the reality that the institution he had devoted his career to protecting was vulnerable to corruption and exploitation in ways he had never previously understood. The knowledge that such betrayal was possible would forever change his approach to his duties and his understanding of the challenges facing the royal family in the modern world. The days following Sarah Whitmore's confession unleashed a cascade of consequences that rippled through every level of the royal household and beyond. Marcus Thompson found himself at the center of the most significant security breach investigation in recent royal history, his role shifting from palace guard to key witness in what would become a criminal prosecution with international implications. The first priority was damage control. Sir Michael Harrison worked closely with the royal family's legal and communications teams to assess the full scope of the information Sarah had compromised and to develop strategies for minimizing the ongoing harm to Prince Harry and other family members. This process revealed the truly staggering extent of the betrayal, as investigators discovered that Sarah's activities had compromised virtually every aspect of Prince Harry's private life over nearly a year-long period. The investigation team, led by experienced criminal prosecutors and digital forensics experts, began the painstaking process of tracing Sarah's network of media contacts and documenting the full extent of her criminal enterprise. What they discovered was far more sophisticated and extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Sarah had been part of a well-organized network that included journalists from multiple publications, private investigators, photographers, and even other palace insiders who had been feeding information to tabloid media for years. Digital forensics analysis of Sarah's personal devices revealed thousands of text messages, emails, and encrypted communications with media contacts spanning back much further than her initial confession had indicated. The evidence showed that her systematic betrayal of royal privacy had been going on for nearly 2 years, not the 9 months she had initially admitted to. The financial records recovered from her various bank accounts showed payments totaling over £100,000 for media organizations, representing one of the most lucrative information-selling operations ever uncovered within the royal household. Marcus was extensively debriefed by investigators who needed to understand exactly how he had discovered Sarah's activities and what evidence he had gathered. His detailed logs and careful documentation proved crucial to building the criminal case against Sarah and potentially against the media organizations that had been purchasing her information. The investigators were particularly impressed by the methodical approach Marcus had taken to gathering evidence, recognizing that his security training and natural attention to detail had been essential to exposing the full scope of the betrayal. The impact on Prince Harry himself was profound and heartbreaking. When he was briefed about the extent of Sarah's systematic violation of his privacy, his initial reaction was one of shocked disbelief. The realization that someone within his stepmother's inner circle had been systematically exploiting his most vulnerable moments for profit left him feeling betrayed, not just by Sarah personally, but by the entire system that was supposed to protect him and his family. Prince Harry's response to the revelations was complex and deeply emotional. He expressed gratitude to Marcus for his courage in exposing the betrayal, but he also struggled with anger and depression over the realization that his private struggles with mental health, his intimate conversations with family members, and even his children's private moments had been commodified and sold to the highest bidder. The prince had to confront the reality that many of the media stories that had caused him and his family the greatest pain had been based on information systematically stolen from his most private moments. The Queen Consort's reaction to the discovery that one of her most trusted staff members had been betraying Prince Harry was one of horror and deep personal guilt. Camilla had relied on Sarah's judgment and discretion for years, trusting her with access to the most sensitive aspects of royal family life. The revelation that this trust had been systematically abused to harm her stepson created a personal crisis for Camilla, who felt responsible for having unknowingly facilitated the betrayal. King Charles's response was swift and comprehensive. He ordered a complete review of all palace security protocols, staff vetting procedures, and information management systems. He also directed that an independent security firm be brought in to conduct a thorough assessment of potential vulnerabilities throughout the royal household. The king understood that Sarah's betrayal represented not just an individual criminal act, but a systemic failure that required comprehensive reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. The criminal prosecution of Sarah Whitmore moved forward with unprecedented speed and thoroughness. The Crown Prosecution Service recognized the serious nature of her crimes and the potential impact on public confidence in the royal family's ability to maintain appropriate privacy and security. Sarah was charged with multiple criminal offenses, including theft of confidential information, fraud, violation of privacy laws, and conspiracy charges related to her coordination with media organizations. The media organizations that had been purchasing Sarah's information faced their own legal and ethical reckonings. Several major tabloid publications were forced to admit that they had knowingly purchased stolen private information about the royal family, leading to internal investigations, staff dismissals, and significant financial settlements. The scandal also triggered broader discussions about media ethics and the boundaries of legitimate public interest in the royal family's private lives. Marcus found his own life dramatically changed by his role in exposing Sarah's betrayal. While he was widely praised within the royal household for his courage and dedication to duty, he also had to cope with the stress of being a key witness in a high-profile criminal prosecution. The investigation process required him to testify multiple times about his observations and methods, subjecting him to intense scrutiny from defense lawyers who questioned every aspect of his investigation. The broader implications of Sarah's betrayal extended far beyond the immediate criminal prosecution. The royal family was forced to confront the reality that their traditional approaches to privacy and security were inadequate in the modern media environment. The incident highlighted how sophisticated information-gathering operations could exploit the trust-based relationships that had traditionally governed royal household operations. The reform process that followed Sarah's exposure was comprehensive and far-reaching. New security protocols were implemented that limited access to sensitive information. Enhanced background checking procedures were established for all staff members, and sophisticated monitoring systems were installed to detect unusual patterns of communication or behavior. The royal family also invested heavily in cybersecurity measures and digital privacy protections that had previously been considered unnecessary. The impact on staff morale throughout the royal household was significant and complex. Many loyal staff members felt betrayed by Sarah's actions and worried that they would all be viewed with suspicion as a result of her crimes. The atmosphere of trust and collegiality that had traditionally characterized royal household operations was replaced by a more cautious and security-conscious environment that many found uncomfortable and unwelcoming. For Prince Harry personally, the revelation of Sarah's systematic betrayal provided a partial explanation for many of the media invasions and privacy violations that had plagued him and his family for years. While this knowledge helped him understand how certain private information had been leaked, it also deepened his sense of betrayal and his concerns about his family's safety and privacy within the royal system. The legal proceedings against Sarah Whitmore ultimately resulted in her conviction on multiple criminal charges and a substantial prison sentence that reflected the serious nature of her crimes and their impact on the royal family. The judge in the case specifically noted the calculated nature of her betrayal and the vulnerable position of her victims, emphasizing that her actions had violated fundamental principles of trust and loyalty that were essential to the functioning of democratic institutions. The media organizations that had purchased Sarah's stolen information faced significant financial penalties and regulatory sanctions that serve as a warning to other publications about the consequences of trafficking in illegally obtained private information. Several journalists and editors lost their jobs as a result of their involvement in the scandal, and the incident became a watershed moment in discussions about media ethics and privacy rights. Marcus Thompson's role in exposing Sarah's betrayal earned him recognition and gratitude from the highest levels of the royal family, but it also marked the end of his career as a palace security guard. The stress of the investigation and prosecution, combined with his newfound visibility within the royal household, made it impossible for him to continue in his previous role. He was offered a position with a private security firm that specialized in protecting high-profile clients, allowing him to use his skills and experience in a new context. The long-term impact of Sarah Whitmore's betrayal on the royal family's approach to privacy and security cannot be overstated. The incident fundamentally changed how the royal household operates, introducing new levels of security consciousness and skepticism that continue to influence royal protocols years later. The betrayal also contributed to broader public discussions about the boundaries between legitimate public interest and invasive media harassment of public figures. For Prince Harry, the exposure of Sarah's systematic betrayal provided some measure of closure regarding the source of many privacy violations, but it also reinforced his decision to step back from active royal duties and seek greater control over his family's privacy and security. The incident became part of the broader narrative of his difficult relationship with the institution of the monarchy and his struggles to protect his family from media harassment. The Sarah Whitmore scandal ultimately served as a wake-up call for the entire royal family about the sophisticated threats to their privacy and security in the modern era. While the immediate crisis was resolved through criminal prosecution and comprehensive reforms, the incident highlighted ongoing challenges that continue to shape how the royal family approaches privacy, security, and media relations in an increasingly complex and intrusive media environment. Marcus Thompson's courage in exposing this systematic betrayal protected not just Prince Harry, but potentially all members of the royal family from future privacy violations. His actions demonstrated that even in the most traditional and hierarchical institutions, individual integrity and moral courage can make a decisive difference in protecting vulnerable people from exploitation and abuse. The story of his investigation and Sarah's eventual exposure remains a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance, courage, and moral responsibility in protecting those who serve the public trust.